computer. All right. Everybody knows that, right? You're being recorded. Oh, no. Okay. Now let's go to this screen right here. And I'm going to mention that sometimes we had to actually break up the video into a couple of segments. And the reason for that was something disturbing would happen. So for instance, in this first one, you see there are 3 videos of David Campos. And the reason for that was someone came by with a boom box, you know, and then after that happened, there was some loud street noise at the very end when he was almost finished. So we actually have 3 little videos of David only because of noise factors, not for any other reason. So let's get started with this one right here. What assembly committee are most important to be assigned to? Do your best to make sure you get that assignment.
You know, I think that that's open to a question. I'm not clear what that would be. I think it could be something that deals with, you know, housing, for instance. But I also think that budget and appropriations has a lot of you know, say on sort of what happens with the choices that are made by the state government. The main thing for me is to have an assignment that will allow me to push forward on a couple of key issues, beginning with making sure that we have single payer and Medicare for all, that we get behind AB 1400, the bill like it's already been introduced, but also, you know, that we push the Green New Deal to make sure that we have an equitable recovery, especially for the people that have been hurt for the people that many of them. Here, okay.
Now, if the progressive bill passes, what specific
my experience, having been a legislator in San Francisco for 8 years, but also having been a county administrator in Santa Clara, is that you have to build community support. It's all about building a coalition of individuals on a given bill that will make it clear to the governor that it's in his political interest to sign that law, to sign that bill into law. And we have seen that, you know, time and time again, where you have success in passing the legislation, but the governor for some reason doesn't sign it. So I think it's all about a grassroots movement that builds political support for whatever the issue is, whether it's, you know, green jobs, whether it's healthcare, Medicare for all. We need to have that political support from the grassroots, and that's how you get the government on that.
Some detail how you work on a daily
My work as a policymaker is really grounded in community, and I spend, you know, as a legislator, I would spend most of my time out in the community, talking to constituents, talking to allies, community-based organizations, labor leaders, you know, organizations that focus on different issues, justice reform, environmental justice. I think that a legislator really has to be grounded in community to be effective. And then you take that knowledge and that information that you gather by being out in the community, and you take it to the legislative house, you know, the Capitol, the Board of Supervisors, and try to effectuate policy and create policy that makes sense. But I think that you really need to be grounded in
Anthony Rendon.
I actually have a good working relationship with Speaker Rendon. I may not agree with him on some issues, but I have a lot of respect for him and actually have worked with him in the past. He actually, before he was Speaker, he endorsed me. He endorsed progressive candidate when I ran for assembly a few years ago, and so I think that it is possible to get something progressive through with him, and I think that having that good working relationship is important. And that's the thing about my campaign is that even though I am the most progressive candidate running, I also have support from people who are on the other side of the political aisle because they may not agree with me, but they respect my work ethic, they respect my integrity, and they know that with me, what you see is what you get. I'm not, sticking my finger out, to see when the wind is blowing. And I think that respect, that integrity and consistency goes a long way in making things happen in a place like Sacramento. I think that the first thing that I want to do is to actually make a financial commitment that the Green New Deal will be a priority in California. And one thing connected to that I want to do is that I want to see an infrastructure bill. I think that California, irrespective of what happens at the federal level, needs to have its own infrastructure bill. Feds talk about Build Back Better. We need Build Back Fair, because I think that infrastructure bill needs to actually focus on communities that were hit the most hardest by COVID. In terms of green jobs, I think that we need to do something in the utility industry. When I was in San Francisco, I was actually the author of the single most important piece of legislation affecting climate change, and that was the passage of Clean Power-SF, which is a clean power, 100% renewable energy program that was created in San Francisco to compete with PG&E. The fact that went through, that happened, we weren't talking about a Green New Deal at the time, but that's precisely what we created, and I want to replicate that in Sacramento.
San Francisco has a use that may not be of interest to other assembly districts.
I actually think that in some respects, even though San Francisco is unique, in some respects, the biggest challenge facing San Francisco is the same challenge facing this state. We have inequity, inequality. We are arguably the wealthiest city in the country, and yet we're the most unequal city in the country. By the Brookings Institute, we have inequality that rivals Rwanda. Here in San Francisco, and I think the same thing is true in California. We are the 5th largest economy in the world, but we also have the highest poverty rate of any state in the country. And one of the things that I want to do is that I want to once and for all tackle poverty as an issue in California, because I believe that poverty is in many respects at the root of so many of our problems. Whether it's healthcare and lack of access to healthcare, whether it's violence that's created because of poverty, whether it's drug use that's created because of despair that comes from poverty and lack of opportunity. And that's why I think investing in a Green New Deal that provides a level playing field for these folks that we felt disconnected and disenfranchised is so critical. And I want to be there in Sacramento as my constituents elect me in for 12 years to be able to take California from having the highest poverty rate in the country to having the lowest. I think that that's possible, given that we are the 5th largest economy in the world.
17 also has many problems.
One of the things that I have is I have an ability to work with people from all sides of the political spectrum, and I actually represented San Francisco in regional government, which, like for instance, the Metropolitan Transportation Commission, which is the transportation body for the 9-county Bay Area. And I was successful in getting through things that were specific to San Francisco, notwithstanding those differences. And I'll give you the example of what I did. I got the MTC to fund 3 muni for low-income youth, 3 public transit for low-income kids in San Francisco. And the way that I was able to do that was to work very closely with each of my colleagues from all the 9 counties in the Bay Area to explain that if we were successful in doing what we wanted to do by making public transportation free for families whose kids, were struggling and needed a way to get to school, but the families couldn't afford it. That if we could do that for San Francisco, that could set us a precedent for the rest of the region. And we succeeded in making that happen, even though the money was specifically targeted for San Francisco. I have a history and record of doing that.
We're gonna pause. What assembly committee is?
Okay. That's where we paused because you can tell why. That was the boom box. And by the way, let me stop this because it just loops
I
over
think that's
again.
Open to
There we go.
question and
Okay. Almost all of you got the questions that we're asking. And if you follow along with that email, you'll be able to hear my questioning a little easier. But here we go with the next section.
Knowing that your man fracking very long time ago, we can tell this.
Did I start sharing again? No, I thought I was going, where's the little share thing? Okay, here we go. Sorry about that. I get distracted every now and then. Here we go. Okay.
Well, I think that, fracking should be banned in California. I think that it is, something that is the right thing to do for the future of our state and the future generations. And I think it really is about making sure that we talk about the science of why fracking doesn't make sense, the dangers behind that. And I'm committed as an assembly member to making sure that I have as much communication with my constituents about those issues. I think that educating people makes sense. And I think that there is a way to work with labor partners to get to a point where they can be supportive as well. If we have the right level of transition, but I also believe that, the issue of environmental justice and the climate change, crisis that we face is so existential that we need to act now, that it's actually something that we should have done years ago. And that's why action is needed. We're too late as it is. And so that's why we need to act quickly on those issues.
Singapore, Vienna, and now Berlin are having success with public housing. So what will we do to get this happening?
I actually did a lot of work in the area of affordable housing and public housing as a supervisor. When I was a supervisor, I was the one who actually called for a performance audit of our housing authority, which highlighted a number of horrible issues of what was happening with conditions in public housing in San Francisco. And that led to actually the head of that agency being fired and some key issues being addressed. But I also believe that we need to build more housing, especially affordable housing. And I have a track record of doing that. When I left the Board of Supervisors, I was hired as a deputy county executive in Santa Clara County, where I oversaw the building of supportive housing in Santa Clara. In fact, the implementation of $1 billion bond, the goal was to build up to 4,500 units of supportive housing. And each unit of housing brought with it services, because the goal was really to end homelessness in Santa Clara County. And we knew that to be able to do that, not only did you have to have housing and housing first policy, but that housing had to be accompanied by services, mental health services, where individuals could have mental health issues and substance abuse issues. And I want to bring that success to the state. And I actually think that one thing that the state of California needs to do is to make an investment in public housing and supportive housing and affordable housing because the market will not build that kind of housing on its own. We need government to play a role in making that happen.
That foreign and investors cause high housing and rent prices.
Everyone has to pay their fair share, and as chair of the San Francisco Democratic Party, I was key in making sure that we passed in San Francisco a CEO tax that allowed the highest earners, these corporate CEOs in San Francisco, to pay their fair share so that we could actually use that money to fund services for the homeless. And I think that we need to do more of that. The reality is that we have inequality is the overarching issue impacting so many problems in society, and that's because our government has not held these high-income individuals, billionaires. Luckily, the federal government is trying to tackle that right now. As an example, and you have corporations like Amazon, that are not paying taxes. Jeff Bezos and other people who are not paying taxes. I don't think that's right, and I think that you need in Sacramento someone who's going to tackle that issue. And one thing that I am proud to say, and I'm the only candidate running for AD17 for this assembly district that could say that I'm running a corporate-free campaign because I want to be an independent voice in Sacramento to hold corporations. You have to demonstrate your commitment on how you run your campaign. Well, I think that again, it's all about proper regulation, and I think that we have to work with environmental groups, Sierra Club and others to make sure that we have the proper regulations in terms of how agriculture could impact the environment and the health of the people who work in that field. And I think I have a track record of holding corporations accountable, whether it's big agriculture or some other entity. I have no fear in doing what is right against those interests. I do believe that it is also possible to have responsible agriculture, and so I want to work with the industry, for those that are willing to work with us to make sure that we allow them to be successful and thrive, but at the same time be responsible in how they protect the environment and how they treat your work.
Yes, by appropriate service legislation. Address our state's unhoused population.
Can you repeat that question again?
Sure. How would we get by appropriate service into legislation to address our state's unhoused population?
Again, I've dedicated many years of my life in Santa Clara County to address the issue of homelessness by implementing the housing bond, whose objective was to end homelessness in Santa Clara County. Again, by building 4,500 units of housing, I do believe that to address homelessness, you have to believe that housing is the first thing you provide. I believe in housing first. But housing by itself is not enough. You have to connect that housing with services, with supported services. And that's what we did in Santa Clara County. And by the way that we were able to meet the target of 4,500 units with $1 billion was that we designed this program in such a way that for every dollar of the bond that we spent, there was $1 from private funders and $1 from the federal government. We were able to leverage. So for every dollar, we essentially had an additional $2. So that $1 billion, we turned it into $3 billion. And I want to bring that experience to Sacramento so that we can do the same to finally address the issue of homelessness once and for all. This is something that has to be prioritized by the state of California. And I think that we can do more. We are the fifth largest economy in the world and the fifth largest economy in the world should be able to resolve this issue. We are a state that knows how to make things happen, and we can do that with this issue.
What's the California Reparations Task Force released its recommendation?
I'm very proud of the support that I have in this campaign from the Black community, and including, by the way, people that have not always agreed with me, like Mayor Willie Brown, but also Reverend Townsend, Reverend Amos Brown. And what I would say about reparations is that it is the right thing to do, absolutely the right thing to do. And I am committed as a member of the Assembly to make sure that the California legislature prioritizes that issue, that we do the right thing, and that we implement fully the recommendations that are made. And I think that all of us, as members of the society, have an obligation to make sure that the issue of reparations is done properly, and that California is an example of how to do it right. The reality is that we have to right the wrongs of our history, and that requires facing head-on the history of slavery, with this, disdain in our country, and all of us have a responsibility to do right on that issue. And even though I'm not Black, I'm Latino, as a person of color, as an openly gay man, and as a formerly undocumented person, I know that my own future is connected to the future of my fellow citizens, including the members of the Black community who have been impacted throughout the history of this country by this horrible institution. And we need to do right by them once and for all. And that's why it's going to be a top priority for me if I'm elected.
Assemblymember David Chiu is one of the co-authors of AB-14.
I think that, I commend the authors of AB 1400, and I commend Assemblymember David Chiu for being a co-sponsor of it. I am fully behind AB 1400 and getting AB 1400 and Medicare for all through the legislature is going to be my top priority. So, I look forward to working with the authors of the bill to see what they need in terms of what I can do in San Francisco. But I can also tell you that part of what I think is needed is that I think it goes back to what I said, that I think that to be successful legislatively, especially on these difficult issues, you need to have a grassroots movement behind the legislative effort. And I think that we need to take this campaign on the road, if you will. And we need to make sure that in those key districts where folks may be on the fence about supporting AB 1400, that we engage constituents in those districts so that they understand what's at stake. And I think that if we are successful in doing that and engaging the grassroots throughout the state, that we will get AB 1400 passed. And I'm committed to playing whatever role I can to make sure that we reach out to those communities, not only in my district, but in other parts of the state. I think it's about, again, the grassroots. And I know that I'm like a broken record on that, but it really is about community engagement and activism. And I don't just say that, I have a long history of doing that. I was a big proponent.
Shirley, it's not, no one can hear.
So I
Sorry.
think we have to do the same thing when it comes to free community college. Quite frankly, my goal is actually, if I'm successful and I get elected to the state legislature, I'm setting an objective that California make higher education college free for anyone that wants it in the state of California. I think it's the right investment for our future. You look at countries like Ireland, which has one of the fastest growing economies in the world. What is so unique about Ireland is that, college education is free in Ireland. We need to make college education accessible to all Californians. And I can tell you from my own experience, having come to this country as an undocumented kid from Guatemala, that I am where I am because of our public education system that allowed me to get the best education in the world. And I want to do the same thing for every Californian. And I think that if we do that, not only will we continue to be the fifth largest economy in the world, but we're going to be even, a stronger economy. And we will finally eradicate this issue of poverty because, again, we have the highest poverty rate in this country, and I don't think that that's right. California should be the other way around. We should have the lowest poverty rate, and I think that giving people access to education is key because education in the end is the great influence.
All right, now we're going to shift to the slides.
I have dedicated my life to public service. As people know my personal story, I came to this country when I was 14. I came here undocumented and lived as an undocumented person for many years. And because of that experience, if I have an underlying political philosophy, is that I'm for the underdog. I'm for the little guy or gal. I'm for the most disenfranchised in society. And I decided to run for this office because I saw what happened with the pandemic. Everyone suffered in the pandemic, but not everyone suffered the same. There are some who suffered the most. And in some respects, the experience of Californians was different. In a way, we had two Californias going through the pandemic. We had the California where people, as tough as it was, were lucky that they could shelter in place. They could work from home via Zoom, and they could do that, be safe, and still get a paycheck. And then we had the other California, that you have people who could not shelter in place, did not have that luxury. If they were lucky enough to have a job, they had to put themselves out there as essential workers and go to work and expose themselves to the virus with the fear and the very real reality of bringing the virus home. And that's why you have people like the Latinx community and other communities of color where infection rates were so high. And then you have people who did not even have that opportunity because their jobs were not existent and they lost jobs because of the pandemic. I am running because I believe that we need an equitable recovery. I am running to be a champion for everyone, but especially for those people who suffer the most. I describe it as, people like my parents, my mom who was a janitor, my dad who was a carpenter, people who work with their hands, who work with their bodies. They need a champion in Sacramento, and that's why I'm running, because I believe that we have to address the inequities that the pandemic did not create, but the pandemic highlighted. In terms of my team, I'm very proud that I have people like Troy and others who have dedicated themselves to a progressive grassroots movement, people that I've met working on progressive campaigns. I was the first elected back in 2016 to support Bernie Sanders in San Francisco. And that support continued, even though I was president of the San Francisco Democratic Party and I was in San Francisco running for president. I was proud to come out early on and support Bernie Sanders, and that's the only candidate that I supported because my values are very clear. And this campaign is about addressing big issues, and like I said, to finally give those folks who suffer the most a voice. And, we're trying to make history in San Francisco in this election because San Francisco has not elected a Latinx person to the state legislature since the 1800s. I think it is time to change that, especially given the suffering that came in that community, that was experienced in that community during the pandemic. That's why I'm running, and that's why I believe that we're going to win, because people want the champion for the underdog coming out of San Francisco.
So, ADEM election, and together.
I think
That process.
that it's been a challenging process, and I think that a lot of progressives trying to put together, a group of people that reflected, the diversity of the progressive movement. But this is what I believe, and this is what I'm going to do if I'm elected to the state assembly. If I'm elected to the state assembly, I want to see a process where the grassroots and the activists are the ones that put together a slate. I don't intend to put together a slate myself. I already get appointments as a member of the assembly to the party. I already get delegates, and I think that the right thing to do is to allow the grassroots to develop a slate, and then based on that slate, come forward and support that effort. And so I am not planning to put my finger on the scale and tip it one way or the other. I think that my feeling, having watched many processes over the years, is that the ADEM process should be a grassroots process, and that's why I am going to let the activists and grassroots build that process and put together a slate that I can then support.
Now, you stated that you're not taking any corporate contributions, but yes, as an officer party last year, chose to
I actually did not do that vote. When I voted, and actually there's a record, and hopefully there's like a video recording of what happened. So going back to what I did, I said that I supported having a process to decide the totality of what money we should or shouldn't take. And I also made it clear that I believe that on fossil fuel money and on law enforcement money, that we should act now. And so, because I believe that it is wrong for us to take money from fossil fuel companies and to take money from law enforcement at this particular time. So there was a motion made to send those two issues to committee, and I voted against those motions. And you can look at the record, because I believe that it is a mistake for the party not to act on that now. I do think that we should have a process for some of the other monies, because we need to have a conversation about, corporate money, real estate, about different things. But I think that on fossil fuel money and law enforcement money, that we should act now, that we shouldn't have to wait to act, which is why I voted against delaying those two issues. And I'm ready to vote on them now. And again, in my campaign, I don't take corporate money, I don't take law enforcement money, and I certainly don't take fossil fuel. Well, so we haven't had a declaration of an election date yet. That I think is going to happen probably next week, which is why, I will be actually taking a leave from my job. And at the end of this week, at the end of the month, I will be leaving my employment so that I can focus full time on the assembly race. I think it's the right thing to do for the job. I think it's the right thing to do for the campaign.
why you are sold versus other than the answers that you've already put out.
I think that the election in AD17 is not only important for San Francisco, but it's important for the progressive movement. arguably, AD17 is the most progressive assembly district in the state. And that district should be represented by the most progressive person that we can elect. And I think that by any measure, I am the most progressive person in the race. Not only in the way that I have run my campaign, where I'm not taking any corporate contributions, but in my track record. I lost an assembly race, a very close assembly race, 7 years ago by 1%. The reason that I lost that campaign is because I had a law that tried to regulate short-term rentals, Airbnb specifically, in San Francisco. And in response to my law, what happened? Airbnb spent close to $1 million in an independent expenditure against me. Had I walked away from that law, I probably would have been elected to the state legislature. But if I had to do it again, I would have done the same thing, because the only way that I know how to do these jobs of representing people in a state legislature is to be willing to lose an election if that means doing the right thing. That's the kind of person we need in Sacramento, who has been tested, and not only tested to do the right thing, but tested to actually make change happen. If you look at some of the most important things that have happened in San Francisco, I was behind legislatively most of them. If you look at universal healthcare before Obamacare, I am the one who closed the loophole that made that happen, passing it with a supermajority of the Board of Supervisors to override a potential veto by Gavin Newsom and then Ed Lee. If you look at the protection of sanctuary, I am the one who passed the law, the due process law that protected sanctuary against the potential override of Gavin Newsom at that time. If you look at the environment, I am the one who passed the Clean Power SF, which competes with PG&E and provides 100% clean energy to San Franciscans. Also passed with a supermajority against the mayoral veto by then Mayor Ed Lee. If you look at what happens to protecting the character of neighborhoods, I am the one who created the concept of the cultural district to protect the integrity of places like the Mission, the Bayview, the Castro, which were facing, not only a change in the character, but actually the pushing out of people who live in those neighborhoods. Again, I have a history, a record of taking on the most difficult and challenging issues and being successful in passing them. And I think that the progressive movement needs that in Sacramento. But it's especially important because I represent some of the most disenfranchised communities. I come from the Latino community, which has, suffered a lot under this pandemic. And I think that it's only fair that these communities have a representative that comes from them, from those communities in Sacramento, especially since we haven't elected a Latino, Latina since the 1800s. But I'm also a formerly undocumented person. And to this day, immigrants continue to be targeted in this society, and undocumented people continue to live in the shadow. There is something very powerful to have a formerly undocumented person who's also gay, who is the son of a janitor, the son of a carpenter, who goes to Sacramento to take on the special interest. And I hope to have your sole endorsement